Judges chapter 14 tonight, please. Judges chapter 14. So it's going to take us 3 Wednesday nights to work through these three chapters, 14, 15, 16, that deal with Samson's life. And the unfortunate part to that is that it lends to thinking of them as kind of isolated, standalone events when really the story of Samson's life and ministry all really fits together and takes all of it to add to the point. But we'll deal with that when we get to the end. Let's go ahead and pray, and then we're going to work our way through the chapter. Let's go together to the Lord. Father, we pray your blessing tonight. Thank you for these words. They are yours. And they have been breathed out by your Spirit. They are, of course, accurate. They are, of course, authoritative. They have conveyed to us exactly the information you want us to know. And our prayer to you is that you would teach them to us. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. As we work our way into Judges chapter 14 is really a masterpiece from a literary standpoint. It's certainly a masterpiece theologically, but the narrator, whoever it is who God actually used to pen Judges, and we don't know who that is, holds our attention masterfully. He uses some of the common Hebrew literary devices. There's a lot of physical movement or geographical movement in the chapter. There's some form of the verb go down in 14:1, 14:5, 14:7, 14:10, 14:19, only to have at the end of the chapter a going up in 14:19. So we see Samson, he's always on the move physically. One of the other things that characterizes really the entirety of chapters 14, 15, and 16 is the knowledge that is both withheld from other people and is known by some people. Of course, the most famous of that is probably Samson's riddle and his use of the riddle. We will look at that tonight. But frequently in the story, we find that somebody knows something that somebody else doesn't that would really help them if they did, or that in the case of the women, they are trying to find out. I think the gist of that is that this is kind of a reflection of life in general, that there are things we'd like to know that we don't know, that we think if we did know would help us to make better decisions. And we're always reminded that God is at work invisibly and sees the things that are withheld to us. And then there are just some things that happen in the chapter that are kind of perplexing to us because we are not of this age and of this culture. And those, I think, are pretty obvious as we work our way through this. I think to jump right to the very end, that, and I think this is true of the entirety of Samson's life, 14, 15, and 16, is to instruct us about the repeated faithfulness of God to his people. And when we work our way through the chapter, we're going to just emphasize, because again, it's inevitable, Samson on the one hand and Samson's God on the other hand. God is raising up a deliverer. He has taken the initiative to do that. And this deliverer will be an interesting fellow. He will be from among the most consecrated element of Jewish society. He will be a Nazirite. In other words, we're familiar with the Pharisees in the New Testament, and it's just not possible to be more conservative than a Pharisee is. And it's not possible to be more conservative in the Jewish economy than a Nazirite is. And Samson is, from his birth, a Nazirite and a lifelong one at that. So We're going to read the entirety of the chapter. It is not an incredibly long chapter, and then we will follow the trajectory of both Samson and then Samson's God. Verse number 14, or chapter 14, verse number 1. And Samson went down to Timnath and saw a woman in Timnath of the daughters of the Philistines. And he came up and told his father and his mother and said, I have seen a woman in Timnath of the daughters of the Philistines. Now therefore get her for me to wife. Then his father and his mother said unto him, Is there never a woman among the daughters of thy brethren, or among all my people, that thou goest to take a wife of the uncircumcised Philistines? And Samson said unto his father, Get her for me, for she pleaseth me well. But his father and his mother knew not that it was of the Lord, that he sought an occasion against the Philistines, for at that time the Philistines had dominion over Israel. Then went Samson down, and his father and his mother, to Timnath, and came to the vineyards of Timnath, and behold, a young lion roared against him. And the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him, and he rent him as he would have rent a kid. And he had nothing in his hand, but he told not his father or his mother what he had done. And he went down and talked with the woman, and she pleased Samson well. And after a time he returned to take her, and turned aside to see the carcass of the lion. And behold, there was a swarm of bees and honey in the carcass of the lion. And he took thereof in his hands, and went on eating, and came to his father and mother, and he gave them, and they did eat, but he told them not that he had taken the honey out of the carcass of the lion. So his father went down unto the woman, and Samson made there a feast, for so used the young men to do. And it came to pass when they saw him that they brought 30 companions to be with him. And Samson said unto them, I will now put forth a riddle unto you. If ye can certainly declare it me within the 7 days of the feast, and find it out, then I will give you 30 sheets and 30 change of garments. But if ye cannot declare it me, then shall ye give me 30 sheets and 30 change of garments. And they said unto him, Put forth thy riddle, that we may hear it. And he said unto them, Out of the eater came forth meat, and out of the strong came forth sweetness, and they could not in 3 days expound the riddle. And it came to pass on the 7th day that they said unto Samson's wife, Entice thy husband, that he may declare unto us the riddle, lest we burn thee and thy father's house with fire. Have ye called us to take that we have? Is it not so? And Samson's wife wept before him, and said, Thou dost but hate me, and lovest me not. Thou hast put forth a riddle unto the children of my people, and hast not told it to me. And he said unto her, Behold, I have not told it to my father nor my mother, and shall I tell it thee? And she wept before him 7 days, the 7 days while the feast lasted. And it came to pass on the 7th day that he told her, because she lay sore upon him. And she told the riddle to the children of her people. And the men of the city said unto him on the 7th day before the sun went down, What is sweeter than honey? And what is stronger than a lion? And he said unto them, If ye had not plowed with my heifer, ye had not found out my riddle. And the Spirit of the Lord came upon him, and he went down to Ashkelon, and slew 30 men of them, and took their spoil, and gave change of garments unto them which expounded the riddle. And his anger was kindled, and he went up to his father's house. But Samson's wife was given to his companion, whom he had used as his friend. So, here we have the story of Samson, or the beginning of the story of Samson. This man who has a supernatural birth, who has a supernatural ministry. He will begin to deliver Israel out of the hand of the Philistines. That is his life's work. And that is, by the way, a work that he accomplishes for all of his many flaws. And of course, we know that he is mentioned in Hebrews chapter 11, something that is a great comfort and blessing to us. But we should never interpret that to mean that his life is therefore an example for us in all of the areas. And Samson actually is kind of an Old Testament illustration of something that Paul is going to deal with a couple of times in the book of Romans as we get there. And that is this kind of paradox right? That because the grace of God is responsive to sin, you tend to find larger quantities of it when there's greater sin. It might then be easy to logically conclude that sin is a good and beneficial thing since it tends to multiply grace. Paul's position is very clear. It is always the same. 2 times in the book of Romans he makes the same statement about it. God forbid. We would say, don't go there. It is true that the grace of God is multiplied in the presence of sin. That should never for anybody be an incentive to sin. So we are glad for the grace of God that came to Samson. We are glad for his testimony of faith. But in no way should we imitate or view him as a role model for human conduct, particularly when it comes to the way he thinks about women. And Samson is not only reflective of his age and culture when it comes to women, he is disrespectful over and above when it comes to the way Samson thinks about women. And in fact, in the first 3 verses of the chapter, this is what is most evident about him, is his disrespect for his parents and his people and his heritage. He goes down to this Timnath, this village or city. It is located in Judah. It is actually mentioned in Genesis 38, where Judah himself is engaged in immoral behavior. And he sees a Philistine woman. The text is very clear in the Hebrew language that Samson is convinced that he has found a woman, a knockout, a beauty queen. She is the girl of his dreams. He desires her and he demands her. And again, this is a little odd to us, but this is convention, right? Parents are involved in the arrangement of their children's marriage. And so Samson sees this woman, he desires this woman, he demands this woman. And his parents pose the kind of question that godly parents would pose. Why couldn't you pick a nice Jewish girl? Why not a believing woman? Why not someone in the covenant community? And his answer is, she pleaseth me well, verse number 3. This is the girl that I want. I want the Philistine woman. I want the Philistine woman. That's his conclusion. That is his response. This is the woman that I want. By the way, and we haven't really talked yet about the Lord, but the Lord is making his position equally clear. It does not matter how beautiful she is. It does not matter how appealing she is. She is a Philistine. She's off limits. But Samson is driven, folks, completely by his lust. He's found a girl no other girl will do. He is insistent. Get me the woman. On the way back home in verse number 5, right, Samson went down and his father and his mother to Timnath. Obviously, they are separated somewhere there. They come to the vineyards of Timnath because the incident with the lion happens out of the sight of his mom and his dad. Attacked by a lion, the Lord comes upon him and he kills the lion with his bare hands. This is obviously a supernatural deliverance. It's declared to be a supernatural deliverance, and killing a lion with one's bare hands is a supernatural activity. And in fact, he killed the lion without struggle. I mean, this is the point. It wasn't like there was this contest in which Samson was wrestling this lion, and round they went, and finally he was able to overcome. But that he rent him as one would rent a kid. It took no more effort than the physical dismantling of a newborn sheep or a newborn goat. And the victory is won. Samson tells no one. And the text doesn't say to us, now here's why Samson didn't tell anybody. But here's one of those places, folks, and again, this is very challenging for us because we do not natively think this way. But it would be very helpful to us if we read the text from a Hebrew perspective in a world familiar with being a Hebrew, and the thing that would jump out at us immediately is that Samson has violated one of the cardinal rules of being a Nazirite. You don't touch dead stuff. You don't deal with dead stuff. Now, he was attacked, and we understand that. But what follows continues in that vein. What follows in the passage, folks, and apparently the reason that his parents are kept in the dark, is that Solomon is being very disrespectful to his Nazirite heritage. Something, by the way, that he knows. That emerges in chapter 16. Samson is well aware of the call of this upon his life. So he keeps going down, verse number 7, and he talks to the woman, and she pleases him well. This is his girl, this Philistine girl. And after a time he returns to take her, and that's take her in marriage, and he turns aside to see the carcass, verse number 8, and there is a swarm of bees, literally a congregation of bees. The word swarm is the word that is translated congregation 150 times in the Old Testament. The Israelites were the congregation of the Lord, a swarm of God's people. So he takes some of the honey, right? The bees are there. They've established a hive, which is kind of weird that bees would establish a hive in the carcass of a dead lion. He takes the honey, he eats of the honey, he takes of the honey, and he gives it to his parents, and he doesn't tell them where he got it. And again, the reason is, or the apparent reason is, because his parents are really consecrated Jews. Let me just read you a couple of passages. Leviticus 11:24, for these ye shall be unclean, whosoever toucheth the carcass of them shall be unclean until the even, and whosoever beareth aught of the carcass of them shall wash his clothes and be unclean until the even. Now that's just general, that's for all of you who would be Levites. To touch a dead carcass renders you ceremonially unclean for the rest of the day. If you're a Nazirite, Numbers chapter 6 and verse number 6, all the days that he separateth himself unto the Lord, he shall come at no dead body. He shall not make himself unclean for his father, or for his mother, for his brother, or for his sister when they die, because the consecration of his God is upon his head. It's a pretty rigorous separation. And yet here is Samson, who knows that he is a Nazirite, which means he is very familiar with what is imposed upon him by the mandate of Numbers, eating of the honey from a dead carcass and giving it to his parents, and apparently not telling them where he got it for the simple reason that this would grieve them. That their son, they're grieved that their son, the Nazirite, has, and I'm not trying to be coarse, folks, but he's right. He's all in a tither over this Philistine girl. And imagine what it would do to them if they find out that he has violated his Nazirite obligations. So by the time you get to verse number 9, right? This is our exposure to Samson as a young man. And he has defiled himself as a Jew. He has defiled himself as a Nazirite. He has brought guilt upon his parents because he has brought them into the violation of the Nazirite vow. He should have said to his parents, I'm eating this. It came from an unclean animal. Don't touch it. Then there is in verses 10 through 20, the feast. The feast. Verse number 10, again, folks, is one of those that is very clear in the Hebrew language. If we could read Hebrew and knew Hebrew, we would know immediately what was going on. It is not clearly conveyed to us in the English in verse number 10. The feast was a drinking bout. It was a drinking feast. It wasn't a banquet. It wasn't a buffet. It was a drinking feast. And again, Nazarites are not allowed to drink. They're not allowed to eat grapes. They're not allowed to have anything that has to do with a grape. No grape, no raisin, no wine. The Philistines, and I want to look at the text. I know that we've read it, but look at verse number 11. Right, so verse number 10, so his father went down unto the woman. Dad went down to make the wedding arrangements. Samson made there a feast, a drinking feast, for so used the young men to do. And it came to pass when they saw him, the Philistines, that they brought 30 companions to be with him. All right, now let's just pause and think through this. The Philistines are enemies. The Jews and the Philistines are hostile. These are not buddies. These are not pals. These are not friends. One commentator says it would be more appropriate to think of them as bodyguards. Something like this. Hey, I don't know what this Jew is up to, but you guys keep an eye on him. If we think of verse number 11 in that way, then we'll think of verse number 12 in a little bit different light. This is not a lighthearted camaraderie, a bunch of guys who like each other, sitting around drinking beer, having a good time. There is an underlying tension here. The Philistines, folks, are not any more excited about the Jews coming in and marrying their girls than the Jews are about having their sons marry Philistine women. So keep an eye on this guy. Right? He's already got a little bit of a reputation, folks. If you go back to the end of chapter 13, the Spirit of the Lord began to move him at times in the camp of Dan between Zorah and Eshtaol. So I think that there's an undercurrent of suspicion, and the riddle functions more like a taunt than like a party game. And what is at stake are 30 complete sets of clothing. The word sheet there actually describes the shape more than the use. It is a reference to the word square. And that square fabric could be used as some form of night clothes or some type of undergarment. The point is, here's the riddle. If you can solve it, 30 suits of clothing. Right? 30 complete ensembles from socks up. So he gives the riddle in verse number 14, which in 3 days they could not solve. They worked very hard. And finally, the Philistines resort to threats of physical violence against the woman. Something, by the way, that she and her family actually end up experiencing in chapter 15. They are burned. Here they are threatened to be burned. And so she goes to work on him in verse number 16, a pattern that we will see again. Samson did not do well with women. Verse number 16, Samson's wife wept before him and said, Thou dost but hate me and lovest me not. Thou hast put forth the riddle unto the children of my people and hast not told it to me. Ladies, all right, think back to the early days of your marriage. And perhaps you are on the receiving end of some kind of a conversation like this. Verse number 16, the very end, he said unto her, Behold, I have not told it to my father nor my mother. Shall I tell it thee? There you are, newlywed, talking to your husband about something, and he says, I haven't even told my mom. Or as I might have said, I'm not admitting to anything. Early in my marriage, that's not the way my mom does it. And if you have made a statement like that, probably at any time in your marriage, you know that it goes over like a rock. Not what your new bride wants to hear, that she doesn't measure up to mom. But that's what he says. I haven't even told my mom, and I'm not telling you. And his continual disrespect towards women is maintained in verse number 18. He said unto them, after they managed to solve the riddle, he said unto them, if ye had not plowed with my heifer, ye had not found out my riddle. Now, maybe a little bit of a homespun analogy, but I'm going to guess that even in antiquity, women did not like being compared to cows. But that's what he did. If you hadn't put the harness on a cow, you wouldn't have come up to the answer. To Solomon's credit, in verse 19 and 20, he keeps his word. And he does through supernatural ability. The Lord comes upon him and he kills 30 men, and he takes their clothes and he takes their stuff and he delivers it to these men. He keeps his word. And again, we dare not discount that. This is an important scenario. And in his anger, he leaves. In his anger, he leaves. Okay, so you have at the end of verse number 19, he went up to his father's house. And then you have verse number 20. And again, folks, if we think of it in these terms, if we understand that the 30 companions are not buddies, but they're observers, at best observers, and that there is an undercurrent of hostility, then that will help us to make more sense of verse number 20. But Samson's wife was given to his companion, whom he had used as his friend. And the idea there is, out of these 30 Philistines, somebody had to be the best man at the wedding. But again, this is not, I have 30 really good Philistine buddies and I don't know who to choose. This is, which one of these guys am I going to use to be my best man? I don't really know any of them. So there is Samson, right? Morally, with reference to women, spiritually, with reference to his obligations as a Nazirite. He just doesn't come across very well. He is faithful to his word, and he is an instrument in the Lord's hands. And so that brings us then to the Lord's role in all of this. Let's go back earlier in the chapter to verse number 4. Samson sees this Philistine woman, and she is the woman of his dreams. And so his assessment in verse number 3 is, she pleaseth me well. But his father and his mother knew not that it was of the Lord that he sought an occasion against the Philistines. Let's stop there and make sure we get the grammar of that right. It's not Samson who's looking for an occasion against the Philistines, it's Jehovah. God has a grief with the Philistines. God is arranging things in such a way that he can raise an issue with the Philistines. Samson, at this point in time, right? Samson just wants the girl. God wants the Philistines. After all, God had raised up a deliverer, and Samson is going to be that deliverer. And so God is going to use his conduct for his own good and glory. Secondly, and we've already made reference to this, folks, the text leaves us without any doubt that all of Samson's ability is supernatural ability. Now, we don't know Samson well enough to know what his personality was like, what his gifts were like, what his abilities were like. What we do know is that the supernatural things he did because he had supernatural power. In verse number 6, the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him. And the idea will be the same when we see it, right? Is that the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him. Right? Just kind of out of the blue. Here's Samson, and all of a sudden, the Spirit of the Lord comes upon him. It came upon him externally. This was the way it happened to all people in the Old Testament. The Spirit of the Lord doesn't dwell in them. The Spirit of the Lord comes upon them. And we have in verse number 6 then, folks, this preview of this amazing strength that God can convey, that Samson, with no more effort than it would take to kill a very small animal, killed a lion. Again, no exertion, no working up a sweat, no bruised and scraped and clawed, and no walking away going, that was a close call. And then we see the same thing in verse number 19. The Spirit of the Lord came upon him. Same Hebrew verb, rushed upon him. Just that fast the Spirit of the Lord is there. And 30 men are dead. 30 men are dead. The Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him. And I would suggest to you folks that these demonstrations of God's power are designed to encourage us. Right? God doesn't do this all the time. He doesn't do it to everybody. He didn't do it to everybody in Judges. He didn't do it all the time in Samson's life. But when he came, it was suddenly, unexpectedly, and mightily. This tends to be the nature of God's work. And at this point then, in verse number 19, we have the revelation of the secret that God was holding. God's secret is in verse number 4. His father and mother knew not that it was of the Lord that he sought an occasion against the Philistines. Mom and Dad didn't know that yet. They're watching a wayward son, and again, this is not a defense of wayward sons anywhere. This is not a legitimate excuse for a son to go wayward. Maybe the Lord will use it. But they're grieving over a wayward son. But God has an agenda. It's a secret. But by the time you get to verse number 19, it's no longer a secret. 30 dead Philistines that fast. And he has just begun, and God's cause will continue with the event of verse number 20. That Samson's best man ends up with his wife. That will become further occasion. We'll deal with that next week. If you want to take out your prayer bulletin, is there anything that